Ladies and gentlemen, friends and family, welcome to another amazing episode of the podcast titled Questions, where we pursue questions through faith in Christ. And of course, I have yet again another amazing episode just for you. So, without any further ado, without any further delay, let's jump right into it. And do forgive my voice, I've lost my voice. My voice box burst. So I hope it does not get in the way of the message. Nevertheless, today's subject of matter, we're going to be talking about taxes and debt. Taxes and debt. And you're probably thinking, oh, is this another prosperity message about give God and God will give you? No, on the contrary, no, 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 no. First and foremost, I am not one to ever take any financial advice from any one of the apostles. I think the New Testament really does not address that in particular. But however, Paul in the book of Romans, these are letters. These are letters. These are the letters that he wrote to the churches scattered in Rome. He writes this concerning debt and taxes, which is quite commendable. Paul urges the churches to be good law-abiding citizens, and in verse 7, this is what he says. This is what he says, speaking to the churches about being good, law-abiding citizens in the city of Rome. He says, "Give to everyone what you owe them." Excuse me. Give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe them taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. So one thing that is commendable here about Paul is that he does encourage, you know, congregants and disciples of Christ to honor their taxes and to honor whatever they owe to whomever. And if I were to contextualize this, I would say that it is a good thing that we pay taxes and that we pay off our credit card bills, that we pay off our household bills, or whatever it is that we owe. Just to have peace of mind. All this is not to say, hey, this is a come on, this is what you're supposed to do, but it's just common sense to have peace of mind. If you don't pay your taxes, what happens? It's just, if you don't pay your rent, your household bills, if you don't pay your credit cards, we all know what the result of that is. So I think it's just common sense that he encourages this, that hey guys, pay off your taxes, pay off your credit cards. Of course, they don't have credit cards, but you get the point. He said, pay this off. Don't don't owe anybody anything. If revenue, whatever revenue that you owe, pay that. Pay that. Whatever it is. If it's respect, pay that. If it's honor, it's honor. If it's taxes, taxes. If it's did. But then again, in verse 8, he does a complete 360. Interestingly, though, the 360 when it comes to debt. In verse 8, he thus says this. Just right after, he says, pay whatever you owe. Make sure that you're not in debt. And he says, encourage people, try to clear your debt off as much as possible. But in verse 8, he continues and says this. He says, let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another. For whoever loves others has fulfilled the entire law. Which is very interesting. After saying that you should not owe anyone anything, he says there's only one thing, though, that you will always owe to people. Basically, a debt that you cannot pay off within any amount of lifetimes you get. And that is the payment and debt of love. Meaning that the only thing that you are, that I'll always owe you, and the only thing that you'll always owe me is love. I think that is incredibly profound because he says, yes, keep paying off your debt. The only debt that should remain outstanding, that not only should remain outstanding, that will always remain outstanding, is the continuing debt to love another. So this is a debt that we pay off every day. This is a debt that we pay off every second, every minute, every hour, every day, every week, every month, every year. This is a debt that we continue to pay to each and every single human being that we come across, to each and every single human being that we meet, to each and every single human being that we know, to each and every single human being that is around us. We are in debt to love them. We owe them. Yes, we owe that to them. You owe it to me to love me. Whoever loves, Paul completes that. And he says, whoever loves has fulfilled the entire law. And he continues, he says, um, the commandments: you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and whatever other commandment there may be are summed up in this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no harm to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. So maybe you may be very good at paying off your debt, which is great, but you are um, you are still in debt, and you owe me love. And Paul speaks of this love. I'm sure this is a very popular love verse in 1 Corinthians 13, verse 4. And he says, and when Paul speaks of love, he speaks of love, a love that is patient, a love that is kind, a love that does not envy, a love that does not boast, a love that is not proud, a love that does not dishonor others, a love that is not self seeking, a love that is not easily angered, a love that keeps no record of wrongs, a love that does not delight in evil but rejoices with the truth, a love that always protects, a love that always trusts, a love that always perseveres. And he goes on to say in verse 8 of chapter 13, 1 Corinthians, he says, love never fails. Love never fails. So I do encourage, as Paul does, I do encourage, um, uh, I would encourage anybody to try, if as much as possible, to make sure that they pay off their debt, their taxes, their credit cards, their household bills, whatever you need to pay off. Be a good steward of all the things that you are in possession of in this world, not to earn any sort of blessing or right standing with God, but just to keep the peace. Just to keep the peace. You pay your taxes. Nobody's coming for you. You pay your credit card. Nobody's gonna repossess whatever you owe. You pay your rent, your household bills. So that's deeply encouraged. I mean, and ideally, obviously, we spoke about this that if you do struggle with these things, that the church is there to be of assistance. Like the church, how the church in the book of Acts, chapter 2, how when they first gathered, the inaugural church, how they first gathered, they made sure that those who didn't have had. So they sold their possessions and properties to make sure those who did not have enough to also have. So I think it's important that our churches, as we spoke about this before, our churches are the ones that help us where we fall short. If you struggle with rent, go to your church. We should have enough resources when we come together to help each other. But overall, it's commendable to, honor your debts. But the point is, you'll always be in debt. You owe me. Yes, you owe me, and I owe you love. And also, Paul continues, to talk about this love in Romans. Again, I'm going back to Romans in chapter 12, verse 11. He says, love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need, which you just spoke about. Share with the Lord's people who are in need, and practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony. Now, that goes back to being a good law-abiding citizen, which is helpful. It says live in harmony with one another. You know, keeping the peace. Honoring your word, paying your taxes, your rent. It says love is not proud. It's almost like a repetition. But also, you should be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. Verse 17, he goes on, he says, do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. And this it goes back to exactly the point that I've been making earlier about just keeping the peace. And he says, if it is possible, it feels as if this is optional. It says, if it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Live at peace with everyone. And it says, do not take revenge, my friends, but leave room for God's judgment. For it's written, it's mine to avenge, I'll repay, says the Lord. So don't take revenge. Let God deal with the injustice. And he says, and he continues, says, if your enemy's hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you'll heap burning coals on his head. It's like kill them with kindness kind of thing. Like when people are really nasty to you and they treat you bad, and just always repay them with kindness. Nothing sucks more than somebody being kind to you when you're trying to be extremely um, vicious or nasty to them. And he says, verse 21, he concludes it by saying, on this chapter, he says, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Um, so I think, well, what I just made reference of, in this being the subject of the matter, the love that we just spoke about, that just went through in the letters of Paul, this is the love that we owe each other. A love that is sincere. Just going back, a love that blesses and does not persecute. A love that mourns with those who mourn. A love that rejoices with those who rejoice. A love that is not conceited. A love that feeds, your enemies when they're hungry. That's the love that we owe each other. That's the love that we'll continue to owe each other for as long as we live, for as long as we breathe. And again, it's commendable to be a good law-abiding citizen to a good and just government. And obviously, I've spoken about this before, about how, from a South African context, how the church used to justify apartheid. Paul in this specific chapter 13, speaking about submit to government officials. So the churches used to justify apartheid, discrimination, and racism, say no, this is the government. And we ought to respect what the government says. That's not what Paul's saying. Paul never and was never advocating for being obedient to an unjust government. Paul himself was a rebel. He was a rebel to every and any unjust institution. So Paul is not saying here, hey, blindly follow every government. It doesn't matter. No, 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 no. Paul is firstly saying, live in peace. Be a good law-abiding citizen to a good and just government. Um, so to end off, I'd like to say this. I pray that you're in good health. I pray that you are in a place where you can comfortably commit to being a law-abiding citizen by paying your taxes, paying off your bills, your household bills. And I pray that you have a good, godly church community where you can go and support if that may not be the case. At the same time, I want to say this. Your brothers and sisters owe you money, not money, excuse me, not money, love, lol, love. You owe them love. You owe me love, and I owe you love. One thing that's also very important to know that love is a doing word. It's a verb. The Apostle John writes this in his letters, is that it's pointless to, when you see your brother is suffering and you say, go, I wish you well, and do nothing about their needs. You know, don't love in words, but love with action. That we don't just wish people well or pray for them. We actually do. We actually do love. We show love. We do it. And I pray that you are surrounded by people who do love, not just speak and say love. Not people who just pray for you, but people that actually contribute and change your circumstances. Thank you for listening. Have a blessed, lovely, loving, joyful day.